Hi, welcome everybody to the Regroup Hour. Thank you so much for joining. It's wonderful to have you here, and I hope you found somewhere lovely to settle in and listen and hopefully be undisturbed. I'm Henny. I'm a coach and I'm a retreat host as well, with a special interest in how self-care supports us as we go through change, which all feels very resonant with everything that we're experiencing today. So during the Regroup Hour, we look at facets of change through the lens of self-care. So we pick up on the ideas and experiences that I explore with my one-to-one clients through coaching and also through the retreats as well. And these sessions are a mix of sharing tools, so coaching tools to build like self-awareness, discussion, and really it's a gentle hour kind of ish to step away from everything that's going on around us and simply join together with others, either virtually through our live events or metaphorically through listening to these recorded sessions, and simply to explore ideas that can help us all in times of change. It truly is a time to regroup with ourselves, with others, and settle into whatever this time brings. So last week I did a session called Weird Tennis, and it's a phrase that I've come to adopt in my own life in order to describe what happens when communication doesn't seem to flow properly. And it can feel like, the two parties in the conversation are talking about completely different things. So like we're playing two totally different games and neither of us know what game the other person is playing. Building out from that, I had a client this week, and it just reminded me of how within that sort of some of those challenges around good communication, there's another tool that can be really useful to understand, which is the drama triangle. I'll explain more about what it is shortly, but it feels particularly resonant right now as we're coming out of lockdown into a time that we don't know what's going to come. We don't understand how COVID-19 is going to be impacting us in the way that we live, in the way that we work, in the way that it impacts our family and our sort of social life as well, our sort of life outside of the home. So having some time to reflect on the different roles that we play in the context of the drama triangle may be really useful in helping to establish stronger means of communication with others, but also with ourselves internally. So the drama triangle, if you have come across it before, is something that can play out in our external world, and it can also play out in our internal world. So what is it? So the drama triangle was developed by a guy called Karpman. It's often called Karpman's drama triangle. And essentially there are three roles within it. So there's the rescuer, who says, let me help. I have the fix. I know best. You can't manage without me. The victim says, nothing's going right. Poor me, others get more, no one values me, it's easier for them. And the persecutor says, why are you doing it like that? That's all wrong. You never do it right. You're a fool. These three roles can play out at work, they can play out at home, they can certainly play out in family units. And they tend to show up whenever there's an element of stress, so whenever there's an element of drama, hence the drama triangle. And they are familiar roles. They're things that we can all adopt, any one of those three, at different stages in our lives, or even at different points in a single communication. But we often have a kind of like preferred role that we'll slip into. They're often triggered. Our adoption of these roles will often be triggered by past experiences. So, it's a kind of neural pathway that may well have been laid down when we were children or when we were adolescents, and we can find ourselves, if you just sort of take a moment to think about family relationships that you have, or sort of particularly kind of resonant relationships that you might have at work or in your social setting, where perhaps you tend to adopt the role of the person that everybody turns to, the one who always looks after everybody and will always step in when someone else is feeling like things are going wrong for them. Or maybe you're always the one who's just like, come on, buck up, snap out of it. What's going on? Quite often that could be a kind of older sibling sort of type of role. Or maybe you're the one who's sort of sitting in the kind of family unit, just thinking, nobody ever listens to me. My parents always give them, sort of always gave them more attention, those kind of things. So if you just have a sort of little think about some of your relationships and just see, is there one of those roles or more than one that particularly resonates for you? And if you've got a pen and paper, actually, it can be quite useful just to sort of sketch that out, and I'll come on to some more that we can do with that shortly. So what does it feel like when we sit in these three roles? I know that I have played all three, and I can think of particular times, certainly in my working life, but also in my family life, where I've sat in all three. So and one of the things that comes up for me when I think about particularly times when perhaps I've sat in that kind of victim role, where I've sort of felt very disempowered, where I felt that others have had greater control over my feelings than I have had. So people have made me feel small, or made me feel so I didn't know what I was doing. There's a shame attached to that as well, and so that can reinforce that feeling of being a victim. And in the same way, in that role of persecutor, if you kind of find yourself, being the one who's like always stepping in and perhaps criticizing someone else in the family, when that moment has passed, when that interaction has passed, you might feel guilt afterwards. And again, that can kind of reinforce that role of persecutor, because we don't like feeling guilty. And so we can end up blaming the other person for being weak, for example. And that then reinforces the role of persecutor for us. And I think then when we come to that role of rescuer, that can feel like a very alluring role too, because we can look at that role of rescuer and think, well, when I'm doing that, I'm just trying to help people. I'm just trying to make them feel better. But there are some challenges there as well, because when we step into the role of rescuer, we can inadvertently make the person we're rescuing into a victim. And that then once more reinforces all the roles. And essentially, in that time when we step into the role of rescuer and we are subconsciously or consciously saying to the other person, I've got this, we're actually saying, you haven't got this. You don't know how to resolve this, but I do. So we're conferring this role of victim on them. And when you are sat in that victim role and someone else is constantly telling you that they've got all the answers and you don't have them, that can feel like a very, very challenging place indeed. And if you're the one sitting in the victim space, then actually the person who's rescuing you starts to feel like a persecutor. So we almost, like, these roles, they become a bit fluid actually, and we can kind of move around them, because if you're the rescuer who's being seen as a persecutor by the person you're trying to help, that then makes you start to feel like a victim yourself, because you're going, but I was only trying to help. So as I'm talking this through, just sort of note if there are relationships that you have where you go, oh God, I can see that. And just note it. As with all of this work, it's really important. I cannot emphasize this enough. It is so important that we don't bring that voice of judgment into it. We are simply observing. And that brings me beautifully onto the fourth role. So for Cartman, there were three roles. For me, I feel that there is this fourth role. We have this opportunity to climb up, to sort of step up into an observer role. And when we do that, when we take a breath and we notice what's going on in the drama that's being played out, then by coming into this observer role, we actually create a distance between ourselves and the emotional pull that's been sort of trying to, that's attached us to these three roles: the persecutor, the victim, the rescuer. And we separate ourselves from those three roles, and we can then see what's going on. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, but just before I do that, I also just wanted to touch on how these three roles can play out in ourselves internally as well. So the rescuer, something may happen in our lives, something has upset us, something's not gone well, and so that part of us, which is the rescuer, goes, oh, poor you, what can we do to distract you from this feeling of pain, because we don't like feeling pain. So our beautiful brain, it goes, let me find a distraction, let me find a diversion. And maybe that's alcohol, maybe that's grabbing a gin and tonic at the end of the day. Maybe it's food, maybe it's some chocolate, maybe it's a lovely cake or something like that. Maybe it's shopping. Maybe it's triggers a thought in our head. Oh, I'll just go on to Amazon or whatever, and I'll go and buy something for myself. That'll make me feel better. Maybe it's Netflix. Maybe it's work. Maybe we just shove it all to one side and absorb ourselves in our work, in our job. And we do all those things because we want to escape how bad we're feeling. The challenge is that then that part of us that's our critical voice, our judge, our internal judge, our inner critic, can then observe that behaviour around the shopping, the alcohol, the work, whatever, and start to criticise us. So basically taking on the role of persecutor. So we've got the rescuer has kicked in with a diversion tactic. Then the persecutor notes it, starts beating ourselves up about it. And meanwhile, the victim is sitting in here going, oh God, now I feel even worse. And then the rescuer starts up again and goes, oh, hang on a minute, you're feeling worse. Right, what can I do now? I'll fix it. And so we're back in a cycle and we go around. So being able to break this cycle, that's the core. And that's the role that can be the most beneficial for us. And it's this role of the observer. So how do we do that? How do we actually step out of this pattern? Because it is a pattern, and it'll be a pattern that that we have played out, like I said before, that we've played out since often since childhood. So there's a need here to take a breath. There's a need here to find a space inside ourselves where we can simply observe what role we normally play. So the invitation here is, when you think, if you can actually sort of draw a triangle and those three roles, persecutor, rescuer, victim, and just think about a particular relationship that you have where you adopt one of these roles, and just taking that act of observing that can be really useful, because by doing that, you're stepping out of the pattern and you're coming up into observer. So that's step one. Just notice it. Step two is to build in techniques that can help us step away in the actual moment. So one can be to, when you notice it in the moment, is just to take a breath. Just to take a breath and almost kind of do like an internal step back. For me, that's something that I do. I actually, when I think about the triangle, I think about it as a kind of flat thing. And then I think about the observer being on top of the mountain. So it's almost like a kind of physical thing where I bring myself up to the top of the mountain and just observe. There are also techniques so in the resilience podcast that had the guests Abby and Gemma on, they shared some lovely techniques which enable us to create that sort of space in our emotional state. So Abby talked about the humming breath, which is essentially 3 breaths where we just hum as long as we can on the out breath. And it's something which enables us to get into our body, which just gives us a bit of a break from the monkey chatter in our head that can often be the thing that drives our behavior. So in the moment of noticing that we're inhabiting one of these roles, consciously taking a step back and either just taking a single breath and going, okay, what's going on here? Or, if the opportunity allows, to actually take a sort of a slightly longer breath and actually physically step away and do these 3 humming breaths can be really useful. And something that Gemma shared when she talked about mindfulness practice. So this technique of creating a space in our thinking so that we can resist the lure of just sort of following a pattern of behavior that's been laid down over a long time, and making a conscious choice to choose what we want to do next. That practice of changing those neural pathways can be really, really beneficially assisted through things like mindfulness, a daily habit of mindfulness, because it just allows us to access that calmer place inside us more easily. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. So using those tools like mindfulness on a daily practice, that's part of the marathon. Using things like the humming breath, that's fantastic first aid. So there are sort of two things there that can be really beneficial. And the sort of the, you know, what's the outcome of all this? Well, the outcome is that in that moment where we stop and we notice, we can then make a choice about what role do we want to play. Do we want to carry on being the rescuer? Do we want to carry on fixing everything with the risk that we turn others into victims or ourselves into a persecutor? Do we want to carry on persecuting? Do we want to walk away from a conversation feeling crappy and knowing that we've contributed to somebody else feeling crappy? Do we want to continue to be feeling downtrodden, to continue feeling as though others have got more control over our lives than we have? Or do we want to change this pattern that's been laid down? We want to get off the hamster wheel. And so coming out of that space, one of the most useful things I find is to stop rehearsing what we want to say in the conversation, or to stop making assumptions about what the other person means or about what the other person wants. And in order to do that, we actually need to listen. And there's something about the act of listening where we come, again, it's this thing about sort of coming into our body and going, okay, now what is actually going on here? And when we stop and we fully listen, then we can actually understand. And from there, that creates a space of calmness around us. Now, if the conversation that we're having is one where we're in some way feeling unsafe, then creating this feeling of calm inside us enables us to make a more conscious choice about whether or not we want to continue having conversations like that, and what steps we can take, whether that's to reach out to somebody, to seek support, to make some other change. If we are finding ourselves endlessly rescuing others, then we're essentially saying that we're accountable for everybody else. And that puts a huge weight on our shoulders. And it's forgetting that actually, if somebody is an adult, then they are capable of looking after themselves. And if we're coming out of the place of persecutor, then really when we're persecuting somebody else, often we're doing that because we're in a place of fear or anxiety ourselves. So for all three of those roles, this time of creating a space to step back ultimately not only benefits everybody else within that triangle, but it really, really benefits us. I think the other sort of factor here as well is that when we remember that we are all equal, that no one person is better nor worse than us, then this role of observer becomes a really egalitarian place. There's a hierarchy to persecutor, victim, and rescuer. And where we need to come to is a place where everybody is equal, where we are all operating on an adult to adult basis, where we're all accountable for ourselves, but we all have deep compassion for the people that we are with. And that while we want the best for everybody, we're not taking on the responsibility for creating that. So this sense of compassion for ourselves and for all of those that we are with, that fundamentally enables us to dissolve the triangle. And it means that we're better able to listen, we're better able to communicate, and then we're better able to make changes that may need to happen. So, if that's resonated with you, if there are any questions arising from it, I really love to answer those. So drop me a note. And if you need to reach out for support, then do. Whether that's to me, to a loved one, to an authority. Reach out and take that action. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. It's been wonderful to have you here again, and I look forward to our next Regroup Hour.